There's a proposal in Congress to get rid of the Electoral College. We'll look at that more next on the Constitution Study Live.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday American.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here, live. We're with the Constitution Study, where we read, study the Constitution, teach the rising generation to be free, and we do it for the main reason of we love liberty. We're here live this evening. I am glad you could join me, especially if you could join me live. Don't forget, if you have questions, we will still be doing the question and answer session later in the broadcast. Put your questions in the comments. I'll pick them up on my screen here. We'll answer them later. As always, you can find out more about the Constitution Study over at the website, constitutionstudy.com. I'm trying out some new software. It allows me to do some interesting new things with the video. So give me a thumbs up if it's working. If you like it, that'd be great. And with that, let's head over and take a look at this. It's House Joint Resolution 7, proposing an amendment to the Constitution of the United States to abolish the Electoral College. Now, I do want to thank Representative Steve Cohen from Tennessee's 9th District. I thank him because if you're going to get rid of the Electoral College, this is the way to do it. You have to propose an amendment to change the Constitution. Some of you may have read my article or listened to my podcast episode on the National Popular Vote movement, which is a sneaky, backhanded way to try and get to a national popular vote. This at least does it right up front. And if you want, you can find out more. When I post this recording, I'll throw in some links to some of the other resources I'm referring to. So, Mr. Cohen, yes, at least thank you for doing this the right way. But I am reminded of a quote from a gentleman by the name of G.K. Chesterton. The more modern type of reformer goes gaily up to it and says, "I don't see the use of this. Let us clear it away," to which the more intelligent type of reformer will do well to answer, "If you don't see the use of it, I certainly won't let you clear it away. Go away and think. Then you can come back and tell me. Then when you can come back and tell me that you see the use of it, I may allow you to destroy it." It's actually one of the more interesting quotes. Let me put it up on the screen for you. And you may have actually heard it paraphrased, "Don't ever take a fence down until you know why it's there." And that's very, very good advice. Before we start making changes, before we abolish the Electoral College, we should really understand why it's there, and then we can make a decision about whether abolishing it would be a good thing or not. So let's take some time. Let's go through HJ Res 7 and see if we can find out why Mr. Cohen thinks, and apparently those people he represents think, we should get rid of the Electoral College. So, quoting from the legislation, "Whereas the founders of the nation established the Electoral College in an era of limited nationwide communication and information sharing. Whereas the development of mass media and the internet has made information about presidential candidates easily accessible to the United States citizens across the country and around the world. Whereas citizens now have a far better chance of knowing about out-of-state presidential candidates than about presidential electors from their own states." We start to see the reason why Mr. Cohen says we should get rid of the Electoral College. All of these are absolutely irrelevant to the question at hand. It presupposes that the reason we have an Electoral College is our founding fathers didn't think the average citizen would know about presidential candidates, wouldn't know enough about them to make an intelligent decision. Yes, communication was slower in the 18th century and early 19th century. This is true. Mass media has sped up the pace at which information was shared. Absolutely true. But I find this interesting. Citizens now have a far better chance of knowing about out-of-state presidential candidates than about presidential electors from their home states. In other words, it seems that the delegates to the Constitutional Convention thought the people should elect the president, but the technology of the times, well, they just made that difficult, and now our new technology makes that unnecessary. We're going to go into a bit more about that why, but think about it. They were able to ratify the Constitution. Granted, that took time. There was a lot, you still had newspapers, you still had mail, you're dealing with 13 colonies. But it brings up the question, a very good question, is a lack of communication the reason we have an electoral college? So let's look at some of our founding fathers. Let's take a look at, let's see, we'll do this. Oops, it might help if I hit the right button. I didn't. Oh, see, I'm getting used to the new software here. Let's see here. There we go. This is from Alexander Hamilton. It was equally desirable that the immediate election should be made by men most capable of analyzing the qualities adapted to their station and acting under circumstances favorable to deliberation and to a judicious combination of all the reasons of inducements which were proper to govern their choice. A small number of persons selected by their fellow citizens from the general masses will be most likely to possess the information and discernment requisite to such complicated investigations. This is from Alexander Hamilton's essay, Federalist number 68. And he's bringing up a point. The process was to have a small group of people deliberate over who should be president. And that just like we elect people to represent us in Congress, we should elect people to represent us in the selection of the chief executive. Why? Because a small number of people would be best able to deliberate, to have the type of discussions that were necessary to analyze what was going on, to analyze the people, and to choose the best president. What he refers to as the immediate election should be made by a small number of persons. He goes on later in 68. Let's see here. The process of election affords a moral certainty that the office of president will never fall to the lot of any man who is not in the eminent degree endowed with requisite qualifications. That's the idea, is we're looking for the right person. Talents for low intrigue and the little arts of popularity may alone suffice to elevate a man to the first honors of a single state, but it will require other talents and a different kind of merit to establish him in the esteem and confidence of the whole Union, or, if so considerable a portion of it as would be necessary to make him a successful candidate for the distinguished office of President of the United States. Still getting used to the software. So one of the reasons we have Electoral College is to ensure that the person elected would have not only the moral character, but that he would gain the confidence of a large chunk of the Union, if not the Union as a whole. This is what we often hear described when people say, no, we can't get rid of the Electoral College, is we want the president to represent the entire Union, not just a few states. In order for him to be effective, he must garner the confidence of the entire nation, or at least a large part of it. So going on, let's take a look at that some more from Federalist 68. All these advantages will happily combine in the plan devised by the convention, which is that the people of each state shall choose a number of persons as electors equal to the number of senators and representatives of such state in the national government, who shall assemble it within the state and vote for some fit person as president. This was the plan. We would have a group of electors equal to the number of representative senators. They would meet in the state capitol. That's what's in the Constitution. and they would choose the proper person, the most fit person, or at least some fit person for president. And again, this is not unique. Remember, we don't pass laws. We're a republic. We don't pass laws by national vote. We elect representatives, people who make a small group of men and women who discuss, debate, and should be making up the best laws possible for our nation, for our union. It is very similar to this process, and we'll start seeing why this makes more sense as we go through this a little bit more. So that was Federalist 68. That was Alexander Hamilton. We also have James Madison, who said, I agree entirely with you in thinking that the election of presidential electors by district is an amendment very popular to be brought forward at the same time with that relating to the eventual choice of president by the House of Representatives. The district mode was mostly, if not exclusively, in view when the Constitution was framed and adopted, and was exchanged for the general ticket and the legislative elections as the only expedient for baffling the policy of the particular states which had set the example. This is a letter from James Madison to Mr. Hay in 1823. You see, during the Constitutional Convention, as they were deciding how to select the president, there were several processes. There were several ideas that were considered. And according to Mr. Madison and Mr. Hamilton, this idea of selecting electors was the best way of going about doing it. However, well, not all the states agreed. And in fact, there were several different processes considered. And in fact, reading from the actual records of the convention, the executive powers of the U.S. shall be vested in a single person. His title shall be the President of the U.S. of America, and his title shall be His Excellency. Well, we see that one didn't survive. He shall be elected by ballot by the legislature. He shall hold this office during the term of 7 years, but shall not be elected a second time. Governor Morris opposed the election of the president by the legislature. He dwelt on the danger of rendering the executive uninterested in maintaining the rights of his station as leading to legislative tyranny. So in other words, the first plan was, we're going to have an executive, his title will be president, we'll call him His Excellency. Glad that one didn't go through. And he was originally going to be elected by the legislature, by the Congress. But there's a problem. You see, we lose separation of powers. Then the president would be more dependent on the legislature. And a question came up, what about impeachments? Would you get a fair trial before the group that actually voted to put you there in the first place? So Governor Morris proposed a solution. Let's see here. To guard against all these evils, he moved that he being Governor Morris, that the president shall be chosen by electors to be chosen by the people of the several states. So instead of being chosen by the legislature, the electors, we would have electors, and those electors would be chosen by the people of the several states. That was the plan. That's what Hamilton and Madison say were the best process. In fact, Madison, we read, goes on to say what he thinks would be best is to actually have each congressional district vote for an elector, a person who would then go to the state capitol and would choose the president, choose their votes for president. Now, we know if you've followed any presidential elections, you know that this got modified into each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct. See, now we went from, okay, it'll be an election to we'll let the state legislatures decide. And again, that was a compromise. There were a lot of different ideas floating around, and there was a serious concern that more power would be placed in Washington. They didn't want that, so we ended up with the appointment of electors in a manner the legislature decided. Most state legislatures simply appointed their electors. A couple of states did have elections, and the idea of elections to choose the electors grew in popularity in the early 18th century. I have found no evidence in the debates that there was ever a desire to put the election of the president in the hands of the people directly. Right? It's always been through a legislature or through electors. The closest we get to this idea is from Gouverneur Morris saying that the electors should be chosen by the people. So this idea that the Electoral College was created because the people wouldn't know the candidates, well, it just appears to be false. It's not standing up to history. It's one of the reasons why it's worth going into the history a bit, and it's one of the reasons why we record everything in Congress. We can go back and see the debates and understand the debates as they're trying to as they're debating the Constitution and legislation. What's interesting, as I find, is there seems to be more emphasis being placed on they want to find a group of people who will honestly choose the most fit person for president. What we saw happen is these electors began, instead of being people you would simply choose, you would show it in the ballot box and say, I think John Doe should be an elector, or I think Tommy Jones should be an elector, to people actually running to be electors and say, if you vote for me, I promise to vote for this presidential candidate. Or I promise to vote for this party. And that became the process we much more know today. In fact, we don't choose men and women who will deliberate over the selection of president anymore like we used to. The states have turned over the choosing of electors into a popularity contest. It's now more about choose these electors who will vote for this party. And that's what we see is this has become much more about party than it is about finding men and women who will choose a presidential candidate based on their character, based on their history, based on what they've done. It really is to me a sad state of affairs, but it's not a federal issue. It's not even a constitutional issue. It's a state issue. It's the states that have adopted laws that say that legally bind electors to parties or to candidates. It's states that have set up the election process so they control who you even get to vote for. It's the states that have changed this, I believe, in large part because they've been influenced so much by party, that the parties now control the process. Again, more because we let them than because of anything else. Back to the bill. Whereas the Electoral College is premised on an antiquated theory that citizens will have a better chance of knowing about electors from their home states than about presidential candidates from out of state. Again, I see absolutely no evidence that this is why our founding fathers chose this method of choosing electors. The Electoral College was not based on the knowledge of the citizenry. None of the debates say, listen, the people just won't know. It's not there. It's back to the question of, do we choose people to represent us or not? And it makes me wonder if Mr. Cohen would place the same test on his position as a representative for the 9th District of Tennessee as he's trying to place on the President of the United States. Yeah, well, let's go on. Let's see. Whereas the 15th Amendment guarantees the right of all citizens to vote regardless of race, whereas the 19th Amendment guarantees the right of all citizens to vote regardless of gender, whereas the 26th Amendment guarantees the right of all citizens 18 years of age or older to vote regardless of age. When I was in school and we had to do papers and reports, we used to do this thing called padding, where we would take and just add stuff that sounded like it related to make it seem like we had done more research or done more to it. This is pure fluff. This is padding. None of these three amendments have anything to do with the Electoral College. None of them have anything to do with why we have an Electoral College. They're just there. My guess is Mr. Cohen or whoever he had write this particular piece of legislation for him said, go find every article, every amendment, everything that talks about voting. We'll just throw it in there and see if we can, baffle them with the amount of quotes we have. So that's that. Whereas, since the nation's founding, United States citizens have amended the Constitution to expand the opportunity for citizens to directly elect their elected leaders, whereas the 17th Amendment establishes both a precedent and a preference for the direct election of citizens' elected representatives. Mr. Cohen is correct in that just once, we amended the Constitution to allow the direct election of the popular election of an office that was previously not popularly elected. That is the 17th Amendment, where we went from the state legislatures choosing senators to choosing senators by popular vote. Does it establish a precedent? Yes. Does it establish a preference? I doubt most Americans even think about that. In fact, I bet you if you asked most Americans about the 17th Amendment, they'd have no clue what you were talking about. In fact, I'd go so far to say the 17th Amendment has been disastrous to the Republic because it centralizes power in Washington. It removes the states from the process of governing. And what we see here is Mr. Cohen removing the states from the process of choosing a president. He doesn't want the states involved. At least apparently he doesn't want the states involved. It further weakens this idea of federalism. It further weakens the republic. It turns us much more into a direct democracy, from a republic to a democracy. And we'll get into more about that a little further on, because Mr. Cohen goes on to say that the Electoral College has become an anachronism. Really? I mean, I guess if all you've got is fluff and misrepresentation, we'll call it an anachronism. I'm sorry, it's not an anachronism. It is an important part of the checks and balances that are the structure of our federal government. It ensures that for a person to be president, they must get support from a large swath of the nation. If not geographically, certainly popularity, and actually in this case, geographically as well. See, rather than choosing wise people to select a president, the states have turned this into a political beauty pageant. Now it's not about the what the president can do, what the president will do, and his ability to uphold his office. It's become a beauty pageant with the talent show, the swimsuit, the evening gown, and of course, the dreaded question and answer period. I think we call them debates nowadays. See, the political parties have been allowed to control the show to the point that they even dictate to us who we can vote for. I was talking to somebody several weeks ago, talking about, you get to the point of actual election night or election day, you go to the poll, and really you're down to two people. Why? Why do you have only two people to choose from? Because the states have established a system whereby the parties control so much of the electoral process that by the time you get to the day where you make your vote, they've weeded everybody out but the two people they want. One for one party, one for the other. Oh, sure, you can vote for a third party, but what do they tell you? You do that, you're wasting your vote. You're voting for the other person. The anachronism is not the Electoral College. To me, the problem is the fact that we've let parties control state politics to the point where we don't have a choice. It's now, it's not men and women getting together in state capitals going, okay, it's our job to decide who should be the president of this nation. Let's sit down. Let's look at the possibilities. Let's analyze their records. Let's decide how we're going to vote, and then vote. It's now a 2-year show, a process. There are already people who've announced they're running in 2020. It's a 2-year show. And, I find it interesting that the people who complain about the Electoral College only seem to be the ones that have lost a presidential election. Isn't that interesting? Isn't it interesting how only one party, which has lost elections, seems to complain about the Electoral College, and they only do it when they lose? Maybe this is not about the Electoral College being an anachronism. Maybe it's about the fact that they lost and they don't like it, and now they want to change the rules. Actually, I think they want to change a bit more. But again, we're getting into that. It's in here, I promise. So, Section 1 of the legislation says the president and vice president shall be elected by the people of the several states and the district constituting the seat of government of the United States. My tongue didn't tie around that one. So, that brings up a very good question. Why shouldn't the president be elected by the people of the United States? Is there, just as Mr. Cheston said, we shouldn't get rid of it without knowing what it is. There's a flip side to that. Is there a reason why the way we do it is good? Why shouldn't they do that? Well, as I've said, to go to a direct election of the president degrades the republic. It removes power from the states, thereby centralizing power in Washington. And it marches us towards a direct democracy, something our founders feared greatly. They feared it so much they enshrined in the Constitution the requirement that each state have a Republican form of government. So you may ask yourself, why is a political structure that's so vaunted like democracy? We always hear about, we're saving democracy, we're bringing democracy, yay, yay, rah, rah, democracy. Why would that be feared by our founding fathers? Well, it's simple. They'd seen history. John Adams said, remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. It is in vain to say that democracy is less vain, less proud, less selfish, less ambitious, or less avarice than aristocracy or monarchy. It is not true in fact and nowhere appears in history. John Adams said, listen, every time democracy has been tried, it doesn't last long. It destroys itself. It murders itself. Democracy isn't some magical, pixie dust and everything gets better. No. In fact, you look at history, democracies destroy themselves. Why, you may ask? It has been deserved that a pure democracy, if it were practicable, would be the most perfect government. Experience has proved that no position is more false than this. The ancient democracies in which the people themselves deliberated never possessed one good feature of government. Their very character was tyranny, their figure, deformity. The ancient democracies, there are countries that tried this. And what did they say? There was no good feature. But wait a second, Paul. The people chose. But what did they see? That choosing quickly devolved into tyranny. It devolves into this mess. We think of democracy in this beautiful, here we go, we get to vote, life is good, but we never think what happens next. Think of it this way. Not that long ago, we had a Supreme Court justice proposed, and he went through a rather nasty confirmation. Imagine if what happened to him happened to anybody or any piece of legislation. Imagine there was a law that most everybody thought was pretty good. They disagreed with certain parts of it. They thought it was pretty good, but out of the woodwork came people who lied, who had no evidence to support their position, but said, this is what will happen. This is terrible. Who distorted the facts and reality, who made up information and then changed their minds when it didn't work. Imagine, rather than picking a person, that was how we passed legislation. Think I'm kidding? Look at the Green New Deal. The facts behind that, so many of them have been found to be so false, so errant, so ridiculously naive as to be infantile, yet we still hear about it. Imagine if legislation was not based on the reasonable debate of men and women who were chosen to weed out the fluff and get to the facts, but was based on however many people the media could whip up. Do you think your rights would be protected then? Let's go from Madison. Let's take a look at James Madison here. Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security and the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Democracies are turbulent. Remember, in roughly this shortly after the American Revolution and the establishment of an American republic, we had the French Revolution, where they established a democracy. Anybody remember that? Anybody remember studying that in history? The Reign of Terror? Robespierre? How long did that government last? Just a few years. And do you know what you got after that? Napoleon Bonaparte. See, Napoleon Bonaparte is the logical outcome of a pure democracy. Because when you cannot have an ordered, structured transfer of power, when everything is rile people up and get them to agree, eventually the chaos gets so bad, people will beg for any sort of logical process, any sort of standard. And sure enough, a strong man will show up, and a strong man will give you security over liberty. Funny how we hear more and more today how we have to give up our liberties to maintain our security, because we are getting ever closer to a pure democracy. They do not lead to tranquility, but to turmoil, strife, and conflict. And they do not protect your property rights. See, we live in a constitutional republic. The Congress cannot make a law legally that violates your right to free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, right to peaceably assemble, be secure in your papers, properties, and effects, deprive you of life, liberty, or property without due process. They can't. There is something above the government. In a democracy, your rights are limited to what 50% plus one will agree on. So with all this discussion about hate speech, how long do you think before your right to speak freely will be abolished? Because enough people say, I don't like how somebody speaks. I think we should be told what to speak. Or, you know what, I don't think that that internet blogger or that news organization, I don't think that's really the press. And I get 50% plus one to agree to that. And there goes your freedom of the press. We've already lost the right to be secure in our papers, properties, and effects. FISA has done that. Civil asset forfeiture has done that. The Fifth Amendment's out the window from, again, civil asset forfeiture. We're seeing more and more due process thrown out with red flag laws. It's being dismantled because we're turning ourselves into a democracy where you get enough people to agree. And now the only difference is, instead of the people voting directly, it goes through Congress. And Congress are such spineless weasels that, it's turning into democracy. And how long before every citizen, every corner, the fights that happen in Congress. How long do you think before they would simply start happening everywhere? On every street corner, in every home, every citizen, rather than having people who can take the time and analyze the information, it just becomes a shouting match in the streets, on the internet. Does that really sound like a better system? How long do you think that devolves into tyranny? The tyranny of who can get the most word out. The tyranny of the media. This is the future that they're proposing with this amendment. This is what it may not be their intention, but this is a logical outcome. This is why Cheston said, look at why it's there. Explain to me why it's there. Then maybe I'll let you change it. But there's another part to this which often gets lost, and I think it's important and certainly worth looking at. See, if you look at the powers delegated to the office of president, you don't see a representative of the people. You see a representative of the states, of the Union. So go read Article 2, Sections 2 and 3 of the Constitution. What do you see? Well, you see the president has two main roles. His job is to execute the laws of the United States, the federal government, the federal laws, and to represent the Union of States primarily in foreign affairs. The president has no constitutional authority over domestic affairs. He can appoint ambassadors with the advice and consent of the Senate. He can appoint judges. He can sign treaties with the advice and consent of the Senate. But you don't see him involved in water rights. Why do we put such emphasis on the president nowadays? Not because it's his constitutional job, but because Congress has abdicated their responsibility of lawmaking. You see, the only reason we worry so much about the president is because Congress has, rather than passing detailed laws, they said, we're going to just create this federal agency and let the executive branch write the rules. They've abdicated their lawmaking power to the executive branch, to the president. They've effectively made the president a legislative body by saying, your agencies get to make rules, regulations with the force of law, where you can be fined, where you can be put in jail. No, it's not a good system, but rather than making the problem worse, how about we go back to the way things are supposed to be and see if they're better? Now, I mentioned this earlier. There is a move for what's called a national popular vote. And the idea is to get the states to do this without the Constitution. And I have a whole different article about that. And if you read that article, you'll see I go into a lot more detail, but a national popular election for president places the decision for the president in a very few, very small regions of the United States. While the election may technically be nationwide, really it would only take about 10 cities to elect the president. New York, Washington, Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, handful more. Notice anything about those? Very concentrated in the Northeast, very concentrated on the coasts. Does that sound like a president of the entire Union? It would literally take flyover country and turn it into flyover country, because candidates would have no reason to spend time in Iowa or Colorado or Wyoming or Tennessee. They're going to go to where the big population centers are. The president would be elected by the major cities that are primarily on the coasts. Is that really what we want? Has Mr. Cohen thought about that before he proposed this amendment? See, what we have here is another attempt to turn America more into democracy, more into the control of the elite, the smart people. The people in the coasts think they're smarter than everybody else. Well, all right, we all tend to think we're smarter than other people. But this idea that the right people should be the ones voting, that we don't want to do anything that distributes the power through the entire nation. That may not be what Mr. Cohen intends, and I don't want to imply something that may or may not be true, but that would be the logical outcome. That's the obvious outcome of eliminating the Electoral College. So before we clear away our protections, the protections of our rights and the sovereignty of our states, maybe we should understand why those protections were there in the first place. Maybe we should take Mr. Chesterton's suggestion and tell those who wish to change our nation because they do not understand it to go away and think. Then, when they can come back and explain to us why what we have is there, we'll consider letting them destroy it. That's what I think. That's what's been on my mind. Let's take a look here. Let me see if I can find my... where are my comments? Hang on a second. My comments window went away. I have to go find my comments. Come on. It's being a little slow. Anyway, hopefully you've been in there. Hopefully you've asked your questions, and I will get to those soon. There we go. Get some comments up here. Isn't the Electoral College to give each state equal voting? Otherwise, the most populated states would always be the ones to make decisions. Not necessarily equal voting, but as we've discussed, the Electoral College is meant to make sure that the majority of the states would be agreeable to who the president is, to the president that's elected. It does spread them out. It's as I kind of just described, not having Electoral College would not just the states. The states become irrelevant at that point. It literally would be the cities. So the cities would be the ones making the decision for president, and the rural areas would effectively be of no importance. And if you think there's a political divide now, you think there's a polarization and division of the country now, wait till you find that the people in Texas and Montana and Oklahoma think about a president that is always elected by New York, Boston, and Los Angeles and San Francisco. That would not be, in my mind, that would not be a tremendous way to go about doing things. Let's see, what else have we got here? Freedom of the press and outright democracy, when combined, are extremely bad. One can see how that freedom was protected only by the pretense of establishment of a republic we see today. Yeah, it's... I'm not seeing all the comments here. It's being a little pain. And that kind of is the point we were talking about. The one of the things that our founding fathers cherished was this idea of unalienable rights, and how do you protect them? And the way you protect them is by having something above the government, something that the people can go to and say, no, government, you can't do this. And in our state case, that's the Constitution. That's why the Anti-Federalists wanted a Bill of Rights. They wanted enshrined in that overarching document the protection for certain rights of the citizens. We have a republic so that the people have a voice, but that there's an ordered structure to how that voice is applied. In other words, if you look at we elect representatives to the House. Originally, the states elected representatives to the Senate. They debated, they argued, they figured out what legislation should be there, and that process was meant to protect our rights because they would be held accountable to the Constitution. Let's see. Shouldn't any attempt to change the Electoral College require a convention of states? Actually, what it requires is a constitutional amendment, which can be ratified either by a convention in each state or by the legislatures of those states. That decision is made by Congress as to which way, but not a convention of the states. A convention of the states are when the states get together and propose amendments, and there are two ways of doing it. One is by Congress, which is the way every amendment has been proposed so far, and the other is by a convention of the states, and there is a move trying to get states to request a convention to propose amendments to the Constitution. In either way, I think getting rid of the Electoral College would be a bad idea, but what do I know? I only study the Constitution for a living. Let's see. Why am I not seeing the rest of these? Why is it not showing me? Where are we here? Let's see what else we got. Looking for some more questions, comments. Here we go. Anybody else? I mean, we've got... I'm missing some. I'm not seeing... Sorry, my Lucky the Liberty dog is being a little noisy here tonight. Where are we here? Okay, come on. Why will it not show me? I love Facebook sometimes. It's not showing me all the comments, so I can't see any of the early comments here. I don't know why. Let's see if I go over here. So again, I still have room for some questions. I still have some time here. So if you have questions, please ask them. Yeah, okay. I'm not seeing anything new here. Actually, I didn't see how many people are following. I'm not seeing any more questions. Rather hope for a few more questions. But hey, that is what it is. I'm kind of interested. I had pretty good turnout for the first